Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Data Unchained. I'm your host, Molly Presley. So what is the Data Unchained podcast all about? The paradigm for data access has changed a lot over the last 10 or 20 years. We had the advent of the cloud. We had the advent of local computing capabilities that drove more and more data being created out at the edge or in workstations. And in this decentralized world, getting data to remote workers, remote teams, distributed applications across cloud regions is a real challenge. Data Unchained digs into both the challenges as well as the solutions in making data an asset that's a globally accessible resource. Today's guest is Marie de Leseleuc. I hope I got that right. I did the best I could. Yes. And she is the director of analytics in a really fascinating industry. Marie, I told you this when we were prepping, and I've been looking forward to today. It's such an interesting job that you have in the industry that you're in. So thank you so much for taking time to join us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be there today.
Awesome. So before we jump in, maybe you can share with our audience what it is you do so they can understand better why I'm excited to talk to you.
I've been working in this industry for more than 13 years now. And I started as a data analyst for in-game information. So looking into what people are actually doing in our game. We are implementing metrics and we're looking into their actions and we're trying to optimize the game so they have the best possible experience. But also we look into, numbers like acquisition, attention, monetization, the more like the business aspect of things to see how we can optimize the revenue from our products. So I started, as I was saying, as a data analyst, and then I created at Eidos Montreal a data analytics team that was composed of data analysts and data scientists. And we were working directly with the the developer, the people doing, making those games, to be able to help them during the development process and once the game was released. And so I have been managing this team and helping, putting things in place, having the best possible standard and process, making sure we were, capable of answering the questions and the requirements of everyone we were working with.
I think it would be interesting. So when I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, your background is the Guardians of the Galaxy game. I assume that's one that you've been working with, pulling analytics out of. Very cool. Can you talk a little bit about how does that done when you're talking about video games, rich media, it's not just binary text files. Can you talk a little bit about how do you gather information from a video game environment?
Yes, absolutely. So what we are doing is basically implementing what we call metrics, which is like a packet of information that is sent when someone do a specific action in a game that we have defined as being important to look at. So for instance, when people die, we want to know where he died, how he died, why, and so on and so forth. When people are logging to the game, when people are killing an enemy or using the specific features. So those kind of metrics are being implemented in the game. It's completely GDPR compliant. It's completely anonymous. I don't know who is the person who is doing this action. I'm just interested in aggregating the data to look into pattern and find tendencies in the behaviors of people playing the game. And so those are then sent through a pipeline process and transformation process into the cloud. So our data lake was Google BigQuery, and we had different team of data engineer and DevOps managing, in the background, all of this infrastructure, so we would be able to access the data in, the format and at the level of quality that we needed to be able to do our work.
Do you worry? It seems like data quality and finding the correct data sets can be really tough in data science. Is it a little easier for you because you have control of the environment and the data sources, or is it just as challenging for you as any of those out there struggling with the data source problem?
For sure, always something very, very, important to us. So to the point where I have actually I had a data Q analyst inside of my team, and he was in charge of testing those metrics, making sure the data was of the quality we were expecting, sending red flag when it was not the case, and being in constant discussion with the people implementing those metrics and also the people managing the infrastructure to see where there were a problem, why there were a problem, and so on and so forth. So we would be able to trust the data we were actually using. It's always a very, very, contentious subject because there is always the question of who is in charge of making sure that the data is actually of the acceptable level of quality. In my opinion, it should be detected when there is a problem, as earlier as possible in the process. So either when people are testing, when they have implemented the metrics, but also once the infrastructure is in place and we are sending our metrics, detecting, monitoring the data on the DevOps or data engineering side to be able to see if there is any abnormalities that we should be aware of. Because we can test the metrics themselves, but we can't, test necessarily when there is issues in the database itself. So for instance, it's for some reason suddenly the data is being creating there is doublon in the data because the pipeline is not working as it should. It's going to impact our dashboard, automated dashboard, and we don't necessarily have the time to retest every of those things each time. So we really need to have people looking into this all the time. And it's always a question of who has time for this? Do we have enough resources? How do we know where the problem is coming from, and so on and so forth. So monitoring the data is an extremely important part of all of that.
That makes sense. When you think about the infrastructure that's necessary for your team, how does that work within the organization as far as, is IT, is it development, is it the data team? Who kind of makes the infrastructure decisions, or how do you influence that for your workloads?
So the infrastructure was managed by Square Enix. At the time, we were part of Square Enix, and there were an analytics team in London, the headquarters, and they were the one implementing all of those things. So the data engineering team, the DevOps team, and the BI analysts were all parts of London, but we were still always in the process because we were the end users and we had our own specific requirements as, a team in a development studio. And so we had those, discussion about roadmap for implementing changes or what kind of standards should be followed to use the data and what kind of process and who should be in charge, responsible, accountable of what when there is an issue or when there is a question and so on and so forth. So we were able to use this infrastructure and, suggest changes or improvements to the team that was actually managing it.
And where is the data coming from? Is it coming from the gamer's console, or is it coming out of where the game is running up in the cloud? Where are the data sources originating from?
So for in-game information, but we were not looking only at that. We were sometimes looking for different kind of data. But for in-game data, what happens is those packets of information are being generated as soon as the metrics are being implemented. So they are generated as soon as someone is playing. So let's say you are developing the game and you play the game and you want to verify some stuff, you are going to generate metrics. When people are coming to play the game during playtest, in the development process, they are going to generate metrics. And this is this information we are going to use to make reports and come back to developer and say, okay, so you had those objectives, you had those questions about the playtest and what people should be doing or understanding and enjoying from the game that so far, as it exists so far. And this is the answers we have and some recommendations. And once the game is being released, people are basically playing. So it's not necessarily coming from their console, it's coming from the game itself, generating this data and sending it to Google BigQuery.
Okay, interesting. And then there's the business data that you have to work with too. That's not really the in-game data, maybe less
Yep,
interesting to us consumers, but just as interesting to the
absolutely,
organization itself.
absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit more about data governance and
Mhm.
how do you think about it? What are the risks? It seems like with everyone becoming very aware of AI recently, everyone's also becoming more concerned about their privacy, their data
Yep.
usage. How does that come into effect in your job? And as the leader of the group, what do you
So
have to do to put in
yes,
policy?
it's a very, very good question. And actually, it impacted us a lot because GDPR was released and it's changed a lot of things in what we were able to do or not. Because one thing people are not necessarily aware of is people can ask any companies that are collecting data from their activities in a game, in an app, in any of those kind of things, to disappear from their database. So what it means is you need to have processes in place to be able to erase someone from every possible source in your company, which is far much more difficult and far much more expensive than it might look in the first place. It's just not as simple as select, erase a specific ID in a database. It's going far much like broader than that because we have information about potentially their email if they subscribed. We have information about tickets they might have open with us. Any of this kind of things. So this was the idea of having this data lake where we were sending all of those information, not just in-game information, but customer service information that we extracted with API from, for instance, Salesforce or stuff like that. Information about people coming in the studio, information about, PR, like journal review and stuff like that we were extracting from another software that we were using. So we would have everything at the same place. And all of this company and app, they have their own GDPR, compliance things in place. So we just have to send a request to them to say, hey, by the way. But for us, we had to be sure we were able to find someone and in very, very short time, make it disappear from everywhere. So data governance is extremely important. It's just one example of why it's so important because you need to know what kind of information you are collecting, where it is going, how it's being used, and optimize this process as much as you can. There is no, data analysis. There is no data science, no dashboard or report. If the data that you collect is not, usable, trustable, and can be properly used without, also ruining your company because you didn't optimize your process or your pipeline as you should have, and suddenly everything is costing a lot of money just to use, to do a request or any kind of things like that. So it's very central, all of those reports, all of those dashboards. It's very much like the type of the iceberg. There is this big thing underneath the water that is data governance and data management and data infrastructure, engineering, all of those kind of things. So data governance is extremely important, and we had a lot of discussion with London regarding how we were collecting things, where it was sent, who could have access to what, for which reason. So, for instance, should analysts have a right access to the data? Not really. They just want to do report and dashboard. So we are not going to allow that. You want to be able to create, table. Well, creating table is more expensive. You have to actually update it with cron job each night. So maybe you should use a view instead. All of those kind of rules that we discussed together and ended up being what allowed us to work. So yeah.
So it sounds like it's a combination of you were fortunate to be able to move everything to a single data lake so you can make policy decisions or deletes or whatever it is from a single location. And then also a lot of policies around, like you said, the usage, the creation, who has access and what type of access. Did that come primarily, was that your responsibility? Or did you have a
No.
compliance officer? Can you talk a little bit about just who's making these decisions in an org?
So as a director of analytics, data governance was part of, my responsibilities for the studio, not for the group. So what I was doing basically is looking into, okay, who is using what kind of information, who needs to have access to things they don't have access to at the moment, how can we collect this information, how can we send it to the data lake where people are going to be able to use it, and so on and so forth. So this is how we ended up doing more than just in-game analytics, and started to work with customer support people and also providing to the developer of the game not only metrics about what people were doing in the game, but also their team were actually working using Jira and Perforce information that we were able to extract to Google BigQuery and stuff like this. So it was very much, okay, what kind of what kind of data do we have? Who is using it? Are they missing something? Like, is there things that we could do to make it work for them better? And how is it going to be used? Like, who is going to use this data? Who is going to have access to it? Who's going to do the report and the dashboard and so on and so forth? And once the dashboard exists, is it going to be, shared with all of the studio, or is it going to be for a very specific person who needs this information? So it's a lot of delicate, rules and standard and everything. And of course, for the data governance of the infrastructure itself, we had back and forth with the people managing it in London. So I said, okay, so for instance, in the case of blah, I need an analyst to be able to ask a right access and be given access for this and so on and so forth. So it's a lot of discussion. It's a lot of strategy thinking. I think it's a lot of that you have data. That's nice. Where is it? In which format? What do you do with it? And what do you not do with it? And how could you actually do something with it? And make sure that all of this is following relatively the same rules. So we don't have to manage 25 different systems and 25 different data and rules for each of those.
So when you think about you have a lot of data, you have complex processes we've been talking about accessing, analyzing. Who is using the output from your team? And within your organization, how do they interact with the data? Or I presume they aren't technical always. So maybe share a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So, of course, the very first person using those reports are the analysts themselves, because they are going to analyze the result for instance of a playtest, or when the game is being released, we have to produce reports for the high management at the studio, but also the Square Enix Group West. The second one are developers, the one who are doing the game, so people that have access to what was done by a player before and after the game was released, to be able to improve on it, understand what's happening, and so on and so forth. So we had self-service dashboard for the playtest, and once the game was released, where they were automated process, and the data was updated each day, and we had information about a lot of different things. So once the game was released, we had a lot of data that was not always given access to everyone. So for instance, the revenue was not accessible to all of the studio, but information about the number of play acquisition, the number of people, the activity in the game, what kind of feature was used, how it was used, if the economic was balanced in the game, so on and so forth. This was actually accessible to everyone, and the idea was for people who are who created the game to have an idea of what worked and what didn't, but also for those new people making a similar or different game to see how this particular game performed and what they could learn from that. And of course, there is also high management looking into more business information, so acquisition, retention, monetization when there is monetization, or simply revenue each day if there is not, to follow up on the KPI that is going to help them answer questions and understand what happens when there is the necessity for it. So a bit of everyone, basically, depending, but not everyone has access to the data, but not the same data necessarily at the same time. So, for instance, our manager, our studio head, doesn't really care about self-service dashboard for the playtest, but he's going to be very interested in self-service dashboard about acquisition and what's actually happening if people are playing the game. So once again, governance, who is going to look into what. But we are trying to make sure as many people as possible that need the information have actually access to it.
And how does this affect the consumer or the gamer's experience?
Mm-hmm.
Often people have to make the choice, do I want my data shared or not? And this is a case where there's some true benefit because it's going to make the game better.
Mm-hmm.
But how does this affect the end product of the game experience?
Yes, so during development, it depends on the kind of games, really. Obviously, if it's a live game, there is going to have regular updates where people are going to see rebalancing of powers, for instance, for different characters, or rebalancing of the economy when something went very, very wrong, or simply, solving some bugs that we're detecting through the metrics, or any kind of those things that are going to make it the best possible game for the person who are actually playing it. Before the game is released, usually it's during pretest that we are going to have a data that we can use to also answer the dev question about, is this feature working? Are the player exploring the map as you wanted them to? Any of the kind of question they might have about what they are creating. The metrics are basically helping the developer understand what people are doing in the game, if they are enjoying it, using different kind of analysis, and what they could do to actually improve it. And by the way, since we are GDPR compliant, it means we are also asking people before they start playing if they are willing or not to share their information. So we are not. Hope I answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like the data space is just changing and evolving so fast.
Yep.
It's hard to keep track of everything that's happening almost every day. But which tools or new technologies, whether it's machine learning, deep learning, other things, are starting to be adopted or of interest in your space?
Oh, that's a good question. So, of course, GPT has been the talk for the past, couple of weeks and months, and I think it's going to have it's going to be used more and more for different kind of for instance, text generation in games. I'm thinking about barks or any of those kind of things where you could create more interesting things to say for NPCs or stuff like that. But not only, there is also the question of translating everything that is being created. Usually a game is being created in English, and then you have to translate it to every kind of language. So I think those kind of tools might also be a good help for people doing this work. And there is more and more also the creation of agents in games. So, NPCs that are actually more, or enemies that are more realistic, that have, that can learn from their experience in the game and interact with the player in a more realistic way, for instance. There is also the usage of those agents for testing the game. So deploying agents in game to ask them to do very specific action, or ask them to learn from their environment and see where there is potential bugs and find them faster, because you can deploy a lot of them. So there is a lot of application. We personally developed a tool that was able to scrap information from different reviews. For instance, Steam reviews or Metacritic reviews, and journal articles, any kind of these things, and we're able to determine what kind of topics were being discussed with topic modelization, and what kind of sentiment was associated with that. So it helped us better understand the reception of our games, but also reception of games from the competitors, and we could compare. And we could say, okay, it looks like people are not very satisfied by blah. And we could go to the marketing team and say, guys, I think you need to do something. You need to communicate with players because they are not very happy about this, or they didn't understand some aspect of the game, or some aspect of your communication. So that's the kind of things. What we wanted to do also was using machine learning to actually or AI help improve the game system. So, for instance, an economic system in a game is a very delicate thing, but also a very difficult thing to balance. Lots and lots of time. What game designers are doing is putting up numbers, having an idea of the curve they want, crossing their fingers, and hoping that it works as it should. Like, I'm obviously like exaggerating a bit, but the point is, with a machine learning tool, you can do these kind of things far much more easier because they are basically designed to optimize problems. So you could say, okay, I would like a player to be able to collect not that much resource or as that much resource at X point in the game. And you could look into how to input different, number to the parameter of the game. So it would be possible. So for instance, I don't know, like the respawn rate of the different resources available, the number of resources in a map, the emplacement of those, and so on and so forth. So it's very exciting. It works for economic system. It works for combat system, obviously also. So if you want, for instance, a boss fight to be, I don't know, it's like 10 minutes in average for a player. You would be able to like make people play or deploy agents against this enemy, and you could say, okay, so this is the parameter I should input in on those enemies, so the player can't kill them too easily or can't defeat them at all because they're far too difficult. So yeah, there is so many applications because machine learning and deep learning have so much to offer. Basically, they are tools to optimize problem, and we have a lot of problems to optimize. So, I know some people are also using this for like the geometry of the characters to optimize. I'm very not like a specialist of this, but like the different the aspect of the NPC and shape
exactly,
and everything. Yes. That's fascinating.
It is very. So as we tie up, maybe just talk a little bit about some of the other challenges. You mentioned things like working across time zones and some other areas that are still a tough challenge for you. Would you share a little bit more about that?
Yes, one of the biggest challenge we had was the fact that people in London were 5 hours away from us.
And you're in Montreal, is that right?
Yes, I'm in Montreal. So it means each time there were an issue, basically after 1 p.m. for us, there were no one to answer our question. Or there were people and we were feeling bad because it was like 4 a.m. for them. So we had this challenge, and what we ended up doing was having someone in Montreal that would be able to answer our question and do anything that needed to be done, so things were suddenly working, because it was impeding our ability to work. In a video game, the video game industry is a very, very fast industry. Like things are going fast. Like the dev, they don't have time to wait like a week before something is done, because in a week their game is going to be different. They are going to have made so much changes to it. So yeah, we were always in communication. We had those meetings where we were like keeping track of the roadmap, keeping track of what was coming for us and for them, and if they were going to have any changes in the data governance and data process. But when there were issues, we asked for someone to be actually present. A solution we could have also implemented, but we did not, because we didn't have the time. We were like a team, like a teeny team of 10 people, was getting empowered a bit more, maybe being given access to DBT and letting our analysts doing some of the engineering work that was required when some issues occurred. But it was not something they were super willing to do, which I can understand. They felt like they were going to lose some control over everything, and we didn't necessarily have the time to learn DBT on top of everything else. So
didn't want to take the risk of not understanding the implications. Yeah.
Exactly, and doing like terrible things that everyone were going to hate us for. So we're like, you know what?
I
Like there
laugh. It's
is,
not funny, but it is. It's a big decision because once you make it,
yes,
you can't go backwards, right?
absolutely, and you're suddenly accountable for anything bad happening. So we're like, Lana, we have data engineer in Montreal from this like global IT team. So let's have the professionals do the professional work, basically.
And you had mentioned the importance of a dedicated data engineer in these projects. If you're making maybe a recommendation to your peers, maybe not even in the gaming industry, there's a lot of the same challenges
Yeah.
that I was speaking to somebody in life sciences, and they call it the right to be forgotten. But if you are as a patient want to be deleted, but they call it the
Yeah.
right to be forgotten, they're trying to solve those problems too. It seems like a good professional data engineer is one of the things you really recommend bringing
Yes.
into the organization if possible.
At least in the organization. So it could be someone in the IT team that would be given, like the latency to help solve our issues. Or it could be someone directly on the analytics team. For instance, people at Enix Montreal, they had a data engineer in-house in their own team. And he was the one, taking on the request from their team and basically like doing all the work of either changing things or at least discussing with people in charge so they would understand and make the change. And I think it's actually a good idea because I think, for instance, the QA analyst in our team make such a huge change in terms of having metrics being tested and the quality of the data being sufficient. And I think that a data engineer in-house would have the same kind of effect. You would have someone who understands your team, who understands your requirements, and can, transform them, or at least like discuss with the people who are going to do the work.
Marie, thank you so much for joining today. I find it just so interesting that you're working with real-time environments. Very few people get to do that, where real-time feedback, real-time data collection, trying to work with developers who need to turn code releases probably daily or close to it. All that's just super fascinating. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to share some of your experiences with our audience, who a lot of places are still putting a lot of these infrastructures and pipelines in place. So really appreciate you taking the time.
It was a pleasure, and I liked it very much to be able to discuss like a subject I am so passionate about.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.